This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Moms Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions, from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
Hi and welcome to all of you listening today. My name is Felice Gerwitz and this is podcast 117 at Vintage Homeschool Moms. Today I want to thank Lori Power and Second Harvest Curriculum for being the sponsor of this podcast. You can find Lori at usedhomeschoolbooks.com, and we're going to talk more about what Lori has to offer later on in this podcast. Well, today we are going to talk about the topic, which is about changing your homeschool curriculum, and the name of this podcast is Help! I Want to Change My Homeschool Curriculum. And so we're going to discuss what this podcast is going to cover and what it isn't going to cover. And as you know, I have a lot of opinions about what I think work and don't work, but I'm not going to go into specific books, and let me tell you why. Personally, because it is about taste. I might love curriculum XYZ, but somebody else may say, ooh, I hate that book, but I love ABC. And then I've looked at ABC and I can't stand that one. So if I gave you this entire time focused on the curriculums I love, and unfortunately many of the books that I love are not in print any longer, I might actually do a podcast on that, books out of print, and, we can scrounge around for finding those. But what I am going to talk about today is how you can find the best homeschool curriculum, that perfect curriculum, and the book that will be best that the best that you've ever used for your family. And so that's what we're going to discover, and we are going to look at it as I tend to do with some points. So let's look at that. Let's say, okay, you do not want to continue with the curriculum you're using, or maybe you're a new homeschool mom and you're like, help, I need some help in finding curriculum. So here, hopefully you're going to have some tools that you can jot down. So grab a pen, a piece of paper, and maybe you can write down some of these things that would be helpful. So the first is to look at your homeschool state requirements. On podcast 117 on vintagehomeschoolmoms.com, I will have a link to where you can find your state requirements. And when you look at those, that will help you. Some states actually have some books that are required that you are supposed to use. Other states, like where I live in Florida, there are no such requirements. Interestingly, things have changed in past years. For example, for the languages, I know for my first two kids that I taught language at home. In fact, my child, Christina, wanted to learn Italian. My mother was alive in those days, and I am first generation Italian. My mother was born in Italy. And so my mother taught Christina to speak somewhat Italian, and she helped me select some workbooks for Christina to work through that, and conversationally we used some other good material. And so, that was sufficient. But as the years went on, it turned out that we ended up having to do different things. For example, now my kids are taking a Spanish course at the local college. So both of my high schoolers are enrolled in a college-level Spanish 1 and 2 class because that is the requirement. Either they take an online class, and for a language, I thought that would be very difficult. And otherwise, I think online classes are great. In fact, I've hosted several of those myself. And so, those are some options. But you have to look at your state requirements and find out what is going to be acceptable, for high school graduation. So that's important. If you have younger kids, it's going to be a little bit easier. I know that parents who live in states that have certain requirements can sometimes, add, let me preface that and say, I know that they add a lot of different curriculums that they want to include in their child's education. For example, when we were studying a specific period in history, I could add some good Christian books that were set in that time period, or we could also use, for example, when we were studying world history, we could do world literature. And again, I could select those specific books that I wanted the kids to read during that historical period of time that had some good content. So there are ways to select things that you would like to have them study and read. The second thing is, how do you want to teach? So I did a podcast, 116, about methods and, homeschooling philosophy. So, for example, if you wanted to teach using unit studies, you're going to look for curriculum that are focused on unit studies. If you want to study a certain topic, you could actually purchase a book on how to create a unit study and work on doing that as well. So those are some of the things you could do. I have a book, Teaching Science and Having Fun, that I wrote that outlines how to teach science and some different ways that you can do that. And I talk about how to do a unit study using science as well. So those are things that you would look at. How do you want to teach? And if you are going to, let's say, use the Socratic method, you're not going to just, plop a kid in front of a specific workbook or textbook without looking to see if that book is going to fit in with what your ideal would be for your homeschooling. So there are some things to really look at and consider when you're doing this, because you want your curriculum to be not only make your life easier, which I think a lot of parents tend to look for, but also something that is going to give your kids a really good education. A lot of times we live in a society that is, very instant. We can turn on the TV, we can call a friend or send a text message, and a lot of times the responses back are very quick, fast, and efficient. And so, unfortunately, we tend to take that philosophy or that hope and pour it into our homeschooling. So when everything isn't automatic, or, gosh, this takes a lot of work, a lot of times we're grumpy and irritated. And, it may be just like you tuning into this podcast and thinking, oh, gosh, I thought she was going to, she has all this homeschool experience. She's been homeschooling forever, and I have since 1986. And I could tell you some of my best, and favorite homeschool curriculums, but I can also tell you that what might have been something that worked out really well for me was not something that was loved by my children. I remember one book in particular that we used for reading, and all of my friends were using it, and they were, having great success with it. And so my son, my third child, was using the same book that I had used with the first two, and when he got into this book and he had some learning challenges, he looked at it and he just said, oh my gosh, Mom, these are really, really hard. And, the stories are silly and I don't like them. And he just did not like that book at all. So I had to switch to something else with that child, even though this was my beloved curriculum that I loved and I used with the other kids, and it had simple little lessons, and it wasn't this big, huge, drawn-out thing. But for him, it didn't work. And I went through, I will tell you, 2 or 3 different reading things until I found out that this was a hands-on child, and if it was instructions on how to do something, he was more apt to read it. So I ended up having to switch gears and just work on phonetics with him so that he could, sound out some of the words he didn't know and things like that. Same thing with spelling. And, I'm going to get into that in just a minute under workbooks. But one of the things I want you to do as you're going through this, and we're going through these different points, is I want you to get a sheet of paper and write pros and cons. And so when you look at a textbook or a workbook or, people's comments on these kinds of things, I want you to keep a list of what the pros and cons are for you and that particular curriculum. And so, you know what? I know that a lot of times that, as we're discussing, what curriculums would work for you or your family and your homeschool, that, it's nice to find a place where some of these things are available and maybe at a discounted price. And that's why I want to thank our sponsor, Lori Power with Second Harvest Curriculum. You can find them at usedhomeschoolbooks.com. And, one of the things about Lori is she is a former homeschool mom, and at Second Harvest, she's got over 40 publishers that you can choose from. So let's say that you've narrowed down what books you want to use. You can go to usedhomeschoolbooks.com and see if Lori has any of those books that you might be interested in. And one of the great things about the Second Harvest curriculum is that the books come with the 30-day return policy. So if you order a book and you do not think it's going to work for your family, you can send it back. Second Harvest buys gently used books from homeschool families and Christian schools, and you can find them on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. And I will have links to Second Harvest on this podcast at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com, podcast 117. And if you have any questions, you can look them up at usedhomeschoolbooks.com or, and wait till you hear this, Lori has given you her phone number at, you can call Lori at 308-350-0335 and tell her you heard her ad here on Vintage Homeschool Moms. And we want to thank you, Lori, for sponsoring this podcast. And it's thanks to sponsors like Lori that this whole network is brought to you free of charge. And I encourage you to visit Vintage Homeschool Moms and subscribe to our podcast or on any podcast app. And you can find us at Vintage Homeschool Moms on a podcast app, or just go to the website. Okay, so we've been talking about how to select the perfect curriculum for you and your family. And so just to recap, we're going to look at what the homeschool requirements are for your individual state, how you want to teach, what is the method that is going to work best for you or your children. Do you have average kids or above average kids, or maybe some kids who are struggling? And you're going to want to take that into consideration. And that is the next point I want to cover. I know I was going to talk about spelling, and I will. But number 3 is going to be your child's learning styles. And I did a podcast on learning styles with Kathy Duffy. And that is one of probably the most listened to podcasts on this Vintage Homeschool Moms show, because it really goes through some of the learning styles and how to get the most out of how you learn and how your children learn, and kind of how to differentiate that. But I will tell you that a lot of times there can be some overlap. Like I like to read things. If I was listening to a podcast, which I do listen to a lot of them, I would have, that's why I told you, take out a sheet of paper and a pen and just jot some things down, because I will tend to remember it better if I write it down. So just kind of look at your kids and see how they learn best. Do they learn best when you read to them? Are you reading books each day? I know that's one of my friends, Meredith Curtis, who has the Finish Well podcast on this network. She loves to do this family reading time, and we do as well. So, is that one of the things that you notice that your child really isn't getting the most out of when you're reading out loud? Or is it how your child learns best? So those are just some of the things to consider. And, remember, write down pros and cons when you're looking at the different types of books. So if you're looking at workbooks, for example, what are the pros and cons for those? One of the things that's a pro is that, it's very quick. You open the book, you get started, you work through it. A con could be that it is consumable. So once you use the workbook, you're done, and you can't, use that again. There's a lot of spelling books that are workbooks and things like that. I personally have never used a spelling book. Let me preface this to say I did briefly use them and realized that my children could just regurgitate a list, do great, and then proceed to forget it. So our spelling list always came out of what we were learning or papers that they wrote. So for example, even with copy work, if they copied something off the board or, some little paragraph I wanted them to copy or something out of the Bible and they misspelled it, that automatically went into their word bank and became a spelling word. I know that there's a lot of different methods, and I loved using root words, and I found that was a really good word, good way to teach spelling, like, for example, using at as a root of, other spelling words and then growing them on either side, with prefixes or suffixes and doing things like that. So maybe if you're using some kind of method like that, this won't fit, but you could always add them as bonus words at the end. So a lot of people have pros and cons to workbooks. I'm actually working on a series of workbooks, and I never thought I would, but I really, do love them for some things. And so, again, look at it. Don't throw out workbooks, with any kind of preconceived. One of the reasons that I would consider it a con is if it had a lot of busy work in it. And so, if you might want to look at the workbook and see. But, for my daughter, for example, with a multiple, group of little kids, multiple children, she has a need to have the kids focused on something that doesn't need her attention. So maybe she could work with one of the other ones on a reading lesson or a math lesson or something like that. So, I used to look at it as, oh my gosh, we can't have any busy work or, the twaddle-free learning was a big thing when I was a homeschool mom. It may be something that you're familiar with, that terminology, that you don't want something that is going to be bogging the kids down. But every once in a while, it's okay. It's okay for, again, a season in your life. Maybe you've just had a baby, or, someone is sick, or, whatever that reason is, or maybe you just love workbooks. And so for whatever that reason, again, when you're looking at them, look at the pros and cons, see if it's a fit for your family. And then the next thing would be a reading book list. I love my homeschool library, and I have grown it through the years, just adding a little bit here and there. We actually have podcasts on how to create a homeschool library, and it's one of my favorite podcasts that I recorded as well, and I will have links for that. I'm also going to have links for you on some lists of some homeschool, what we would consider homeschool must-read books. I did a couple of podcasts on that as well that you may want to check out. And so collecting a list, a reading library for your kids is great. The library is an okay place to go, as well as the bookstore. And let me tell you, let me just put it this way. The library, ugh. The bookstore, ouch. And I'll give you more of a reason of why I'm saying that. And this, goes for all ages. But right now I have teenagers, and we will go to the bookstore, and they will take out an armful of books, and then we go find some couches somewhere, some comfy chairs, and I thumb through the books. And I can read very fast, so I'll typically read, a chapter in the front and something in the middle and something at the end, and I will know whether or not it's appropriate pretty quickly on. One book I was reading looked like a fabulous premise until I got to the part with her mother had left her father for another woman. Okay, let's move on to something else here. And it was just like, and it wasn't like that was a good thing in the book, but still we didn't need to get into all of that and all the nuances of what that meant to this girl and her father in their lives. So you have to look at your, what is your philosophy as a parent? What is your religious convictions? What is it that you think is appropriate reading? Have books slipped in that, maybe I selected that weren't the best choices? Yes. And then, my kids came to me and would say, I got this far and this happened, and I'll go through and read it and say, yeah, let's just stop this book right here. And, I've got great kids that are really grounded, and so maybe you do or don't have the same situation in your family. But really look at those books, parents. Don't just let them go to the bookstore or the library and just let them, just pull anything off the shelf. Unfortunately, if you, have a really high standard, it's just not going to be appropriate. And unfortunately, that tends to be the norm these days of inappropriate things that are available out there, more so than the things that are wholesome and that you would, maybe have your children love to read. So this link of books that I'm going to have on this podcast are awesome because they are, just wonderful and available for your kids to read. And best of all, they've been vetted by another homeschool mom. And last on my list is what I'm going to call the name brands in homeschool books. And so that might be the curriculum company that maybe you've heard the most about, which, is what I call the name brand books. And so where can you find this? Where can you find reviews that are unbiased? Where can you go look and, see if these are books that would be great for you? And there really is only one place that I know of, and that's KathyDuffyReviews.com. Now, I've known Kathy for many years. She reviewed my own curriculum, and, it is a really, I'm going to say, a very balanced place. I know a lot of people have either loved her reviews or not, but I have always found that when I was questioning whether I wanted to use a book, especially after the first few years when I was wasting a lot of money buying curriculum that I ended up not using, it was great to find her books. And these were books she wrote before she came out with 100, 101, and now 102 top curriculum picks. And I really enjoyed being able to look at those because I knew that no one could pay her to review the books. And so it was a good place to go. So if you want to, let's say you're looking at ABC curriculum or XYZ curriculum that is, a brand name curriculum, and you want to see what she has to say about it, you can go to the website and find that. And you'll also find what I call the gems, the curriculum that maybe isn't as well known, but that has gotten really good reviews from her, and you'll find them on her website. And, that is probably, the best advice I can give you. There are a lot of other things like contests that have been run through some magazines and things like that. And then you're going again on a person's opinion on why they liked or didn't like the book, and you're going to have a very varied group of people. And I think that's, one of the things that I like, that Kathy does have the pros and cons, and she gives a write-up that gives you a good feel for what that book is about. And, it's even like on the, I'm going to call them the name brand websites like Amazon, that I've learned that, you can have people on there that are commenting positively that are paid reviewers. So at least this is one place you can go. She's not getting, magazine subscriptions from it or, whatever it is that is the draw there. And it is, on the website, so you can get a lot of information there. If you want more information, you can get the book. And so, it's a place to go and maybe, narrow down a little bit more about a specific curriculum if that's what you want to use. And then head over to our sponsor at usedhomeschoolbooks.com and see if Lori is carrying that particular book that you're looking for at Second Harvest Curriculum, and you know, it is I'm always so thankful to our sponsors for believing in our show, believing in this network, and helping to sponsor our programs so they come to you free. And again, I just don't take anybody as a sponsor, and so you know, you'll want to take a look at any of our sponsors on our websites, because we have looked into them, the websites and so forth, to see if they are a good fit for us. Well, I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Vintage Homeschool Moms, for joining me and all of the other podcasters on the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. And I want to invite you to subscribe to our e-zine, because there you will get some amazing bundles. They're either audio bundles or short ebooks, and all downloadable for nothing other than your email. And do we spam you and send you a ton of emails? No, you get one email a week that is announcing all of our upcoming shows, as well as any specials or discounts we have. And it's always so much fun to get responses back from all of you. So thank you so much for joining me at Vintage Homeschool Moms. God bless, and I pray that you will seek the Lord in choosing the perfect curriculum for you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at MediaAngels.com and TheVintageHomeschoolMoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.